Welcome and thank you for joining us tonight. This is our fourth meeting of a series called On Becoming Nature's Best Hope. And it is inspired by Doug Tallamy's book, Nature's Best Hope. So I'm hoping that you all have had a chance to read the book. If you haven't, we highly recommend it. Those of us who have been discussing it for the last 3 weeks. There's a lot to dig into, a lot of very inspiring and compelling writing. He's funny, he's down to earth, and yeah, it's really opened our eyes to a lot of different aspects. And I also want to just let everybody know, if you're new to this discussion group, we do have a resource sheet that is growing every week. I do email it out to everyone, along with any attachments that people share. So if you have interesting tidbits, a book or a movie you'd like to recommend, a website or other resources, please send them to me by email and I will attach them or include them in the weekly email that I send out. I want to thank Helen Baldwin for sharing a great resource with me this week. It's actually Doug Tallamy's top 10 native plants for butterflies and moths. It's beautifully done and it gives us some really great, all in one sheet, a real nice handout. So I will definitely be attaching that to the weekly email of resources. So let me just make sure I've got everybody who's waiting in the waiting room added to our group. My name is Jewel Ratzlaff, and I've been kind of coordinating this discussion of the book, Doug Tallamy's book so far. And from here on out, what we're going to be doing is kind of taking the research and the inspiration that Doug Tallamy gave us in his book and trying to apply it or see how we can apply it in our own neighborhoods right here in the Mid-Hudson Valley. And so we are bringing in some guests, some experts to share with us their wisdom, their work, what they're up to. And so tonight, our two guests are Natalie Quinn and Evelina Nodal. And we're going to be hearing from each of them in turn, and we're going to have, following that, a question and answer period. So as they're going through their short presentations, both of them have short presentations prepared, please have, pen and paper handy that you can write down your questions because they will be answering questions when we're done. So we read the book. We've got our heads wrapped around a new approach to conservation. We're ready to shrink our lawns. We're ready to tear out those invasives and plant natives and restore the ecosystems for all of our friendly and wonderful insects. We're ready to apply our knowledge and conviction. And so I'm going to turn it over now to Natalie Quinn, who is a city planner for the city of Poughkeepsie. She is not a Hudson Valley native. She came to Poughkeepsie from California, if I remember correctly. And she's going to give us a little bit of a taste of what's happening in the city of Poughkeepsie with regards to ecology and trees and all kinds of good stuff. Natalie, you can go ahead and take over the screen.
Great, thanks, Jewel. So as great introduction, I do want to just say that I feel like this book actually struck a chord with me. My parents still live in California, and I've been working on them for years now to try and convert their lawn into a drought-resistant pollinator garden. Still working on that because everybody else on the street has a beautiful green lawn, surprisingly, in California. But I feel like this book will definitely be a good Christmas present for them. So I really appreciated the sections of the book that Jewel shared with me. So I'll just share my screen. I'm going to go through two kind of larger projects within the city of Poughkeepsie, and then one really specific project that I think takes a lot of the tenets of this book to heart. So let me share screen. So the first, let me get this full size. The first one, this is a big map. I don't expect you to be able to zoom in on this. The main point I want to take away from here is the city of Poughkeepsie was lucky to have a natural resource inventory created for them in partnership with the environmental cooperative at Vassar Barnes and Jen Rubo, who runs that program. This natural resource inventory was created by Jennifer and students from Vassar and other consulting firms in 2019. And I think one of the most amazing things about it, it's on the City of Poughkeepsie's website under the planning department. It's also on the Vassar Barnes website. One of the most amazing things they created was this, what we're looking at here is a web map. So all the maps that they created through this inventory are posted online, and you can look at, they looked at geology and soils, water, land use, historic resources, and I think most specifically for what we're talking about here today was natural habitats. And you can zoom down into your neighborhood, into your parcel, and kind of see what they identified as natural habitats in the area. And then you can go back and reference, there's a complete, inventory document, and they talk about, the history of these habitats, what we can do to protect them, what benefits they provide to the community, what kind of species they are creating habitat for. So this is a really amazing document that we are very lucky to have in the city of Poughkeepsie. And I think the first step, this is a first step in what I see as a longer process. This was to really identify what do we have and where is it, so that we can start seeing potential connections, right? But then, where this goes in the future is looking at some open spaces that maybe require greater protections for conservation in the future to make sure that they are never lost for our community. And what you'll see here is there's two large spaces that jump out. The bottom right-hand corner is the Vassar Preserve, which is by and large our greatest concentration of natural habitat, I would say, within the boundaries of the city of Poughkeepsie. And then additionally, you have up on the north side is College Hill, which I actually want to dive into a little bit in my next slides. And I'd say the third, I will say, that maybe isn't highlighted as well as much as I wish it was, is that little blue line cutting through the northern part of the city, which is the Fallkill Creek, which Evelina is going to talk a lot about in her presentation. So I'm happy to share links in the chat. I'll do that when Evelina is speaking, so everyone knows where to find these documents. The second project I want to talk about is a trail connection at College Hill. So mostly you're seeing really pretty pictures here, but the left corner is a map of a project that the city won a grant for back in 2019 to create a trail connecting the walkway over the Hudson, which is the orange line, and connecting that up through North Clinton Street into College Hill Park and to the Reservoir Walk. So for those of you who may not be familiar with the Reservoir Walk, there is an old Victorian reservoir, which once was the city's water supply. There's a long history of water supply up in College Hill Park for the city of Poughkeepsie, which I could do a whole nother talk on sometime if we're interested in that. But there is a beautiful kind of circular walk around that reservoir that was recently cleared by our Department of Public Works to get out some of the poison ivy, so it's safer and more comfortable for folks to walk around that space. And what this project is doing is through signage on the street and then a trail is creating connection from the walkway into the park. And this is the whole idea of trying to get folks using the rail trail to, jump off at one point and maybe do a little expedition into the city of Poughkeepsie and check out what I think is one of our most underrated assets in the city of Poughkeepsie, College Hill Park. It's just a beautiful space. And why this is really interesting is the portion that comes up off of North Clinton Street, which is the roadway there on the left, and comes up into the reservoir, is going to be a trail through a pollinator garden. So this project was done in collaboration with a group called Revive College Hill Collaborative, and they were very instrumental in encouraging the city to apply for this grant. But also to design this, again, Jen Rubo from Vassar Barnes is a part of that group, and to design this as a natural pollinator garden. And this will complement the existing pollinator garden. The top right-hand corner actually is a beautiful pollinator garden we have in College Hill around the low rock garden. So this is just going to add to that. So I think this will be the first example, additional example in the city of us really doing a modern project that is incorporating native species and species that have an impact on our ecosystems. So that's exciting. The project is, it began underway. If you walk around North Clinton, you may see that it looks like there's a lot of dirt that has been shifted. It was part of another project with the water tanks that are the two circles in the bottom right corner of that map. So we had to wait for some of that earth to be shifted, and now it's being sculpted. Well, once spring comes, it'll be sculpted to be a nice kind of inclined hill, and then the trail will wind up that hill surrounded by pollinator gardens on both sides. So look out for that project coming in spring and summer of 2020. And then finally, I see some familiar names from folks who may have been on my last webinar that I did with the library, where I talked about the street tree inventory. But for those of you who weren't, the city completed a full inventory of all of our street trees in 2019, and then completed a management plan to give us like a 5-year plan of how best to manage and grow our urban forest over the next 5 years. So again, this was grant funded. We got $50,000 from the DEC Urban and Community Forestry Grant Program. And you know, there was folks who went street by street and inventoried these trees, looked at their species, their size, their current condition, specifically looking for any ash trees and updating their condition in terms of the emerald ash borer impacts. And what I wanted to stop on this because, you know, even reading the book, I rethought this document and even our management plan. We definitely encourage native species, but it really put the portion about Portland, Oregon, and how he walked around, I think it was with his granddaughter, and inventoried, you know, all the trees around them. I think we have a very similar situation in the city of Poughkeepsie. These are our 5 most popular trees in the city. And I think only 2 of them are native, the crabapple and the green ash, where the other are all either are transported right to the city of Poughkeepsie. When you look at the next slide, you know, if you look at go away from those top 5 and start looking at the other most populous trees, we do start to get some more natives in terms of the maples and the oaks. I think the crabapple again is in there, pin oak, honey locust are all native, but we do have a lot of non-native trees. And I think, you know, just as a consideration, the things that often come to mind is we're often looking for trees that are suitable for planting in an urban environment, specifically on a street edge that gets a lot of salt and damage on it. So sometimes, you know, there's a desire to choose non-native trees that sustain road salts and kind of urban environments better than others. And then also, I think the other thing is, you know, it's a constant conversation when I'm talking with DPW or different members in the city who want to plant more street trees, is we can't always just choose the ones that are super pretty. I know everyone loves in spring walking around the city and seeing all the beautiful blooming flowers. And I think, you know, it is a really lovely thing, and it definitely does. It is an image of the city of Poughkeepsie, I think, that many people have in spring, but a number of those are not native. And so maybe we should think about diversifying our forests more, our urban forests more, to make sure that we have at least a majority of native trees. And I think that's something that we continue to work on. So that's my initial overview. I think there's 2 other things. There's one other project I want to talk about that's citywide scale. Doesn't necessarily have directly a lot to do with conservation, but the city is working to become a climate smart community. And that's a statewide program that goes through a certification process. And within I think there are a number of actions that every time you complete an action, you get points. And then it's kind of like this competition amongst municipalities in the state to see who can become climate smart fastest. It's, you know, a little bit of healthy competition there. But I think there's a lot of things that we could get points for by integrating conservation and natural habitats within certain actions that we're doing and projects around the city. So that kind of falls within that. And with that, I'll turn it over to Evelina now, and then I'm happy to answer questions at the end. Thanks.
And I realize I did not do any kind of introduction for Evelina. So although I know Evelina for a couple of years now, she works with Mass Design Group, and I know that she's got architecture and city planning in her background, but maybe you could give us a little bit more of an introduction to yourself and your work, Evelina.
Sure, yeah. I see a couple familiar faces, but I think a lot of you don't know me. So I am actually, my title is an urban designer. And I went to school originally for architecture, and then I got my graduate degree at Columbia University in urban design, which is actually where I met my current employer, Mass Design Group, and moved up to Poughkeepsie to help start an office here on the ground in the city. But if you're not familiar with Mass Design Group, just a really quick overview, we're a nonprofit architecture firm with offices all over the world. We started in Rwanda, Africa, and kind of made our way in the realm of the medical profession and designing doctors' housing and hospitals for those who did not have access to healthcare with Doctors Without Borders. And so that's kind of where we got our start. And ever since, we've really made it our mission to work to create buildings and designs that focus on social impact and justice. So that's kind of where we're at. And we found a great opportunity to work here in Poughkeepsie to look at smaller scale cities and how we can really study the urban impacts through history of transportation systems and ecology and design of buildings and how all of it works together. And so that's kind of what I think of as urban design, is taking the buildings and their connections and their surroundings and figuring out how all of those systems kind of work together. So it's very related to what Natalie was talking about and city planning, but then also integrating that building scale and architectural designs as well. So with that, I'm also gonna share my screen and this up. And so, as Natalie mentioned, we have been working on an initiative with the Fallkill Creek pretty much since our office got here in 2017. We saw the Fallkill as a really incredible and fascinating opportunity, and also one of the most continuous ecological threads that we have through the city of Poughkeepsie. Also, if you get into the history of it, the origin of the city is there were mill ponds that were created along the length of the Fallkill, and that's what enabled a lot of the industries that made the city possible. So it has an industrial background, but it also has a lot of incredible biodiversity, and it's often overlooked as a resource. A lot of people dump trash in it. It's kind of shrouded with trees, which is a good thing, but also means that you don't always see it when you're walking around the city. So a lot of residents don't even know that it's there. But when we first got to the city, we actually did what we called a Fallkill safari, where we all got in our hip waders and we walked through the Fallkill Creek, the entire thing. And we were so astonished to find all of the wildlife, the incredible trees, the plants, the bugs, there was just everything there. And so these are just a few of the photos that were snapped, and then also some photos courtesy of Sean Hammerly. But you see raccoons, you see lots of butterflies. It really just felt like an entirely different part of the city. You didn't even really feel like you were in a city. And then also just calling out a lot of incredible events and organizations do work around the Fallkill Creek. The Fallkill Aquablitz Also calling out Jen Rubo and the Environmental Cooperative at Vassar Barnes. They do the Fall Kill Aquablitz every year, and it's an attempt to get youth and community members out and learning about the ecology of the creek, all of the different animals that actually still live in the creek. A lot of people are concerned about the toxicity of the water, but in fact, there are still a lot of animals that live in there, maybe not as many as there used to be, say 20 to 30 years ago, but they're still there. And some people may also know about the eels that migrate up from the ocean every year and spawn in the fall kill. That's pretty incredible. So there's a lot to learn about this creek. And the other thing about the creek that we learned walking through it and walking along it is the variety of different conditions of its edges. So it goes through private property and people's backyards. It goes through public property, parks and schools. It has incredibly high walls that border it and channelize it. It borders buildings, it borders auto body shops, lots of auto body shops because it is in an industrial zone. And so you see a lot of tires from those shops, parking lots. And then of course, it also borders roadways. So this is a challenge and an opportunity when you start to think about our project, which the concept is to create a continuous trail along the Fall Kill, which is very in early stages, but is being called a greenway or the Fall Kill Trail. We're not really sure yet, but these are some, when you're thinking about how to create that continuity, it doesn't necessarily mean that a trail will be continuous the entire length of the creek, but ecologically and through plantings and biodiversity and the way that you pave and the way that you incorporate trees and plants, you can create other forms of continuity through the trail. So what we did was we actually took what we call a pocket park approach to looking at the creek. We identified specific locations along its edges that were either publicly owned or owned by partners like Hudson River Housing, or new housing developers who had parking lots that they had no concept for. And parking lots are a great opportunity to look at, you still have to park cars there, but can you add trees? Can you add grasses? Can you kind of increase the permeability of the surface? The Family Partnership Center became one of our primary sites, looking at its backyard as well as its parking lot across the street. So we identified a number of different sites. But the one that I was just going to quickly delve into today, because we have begun doing a schematic design for this park, is Malcolm X, right across from Morris Elementary School and right next to Beulah Baptist Church. So just giving you a little bit of context there, and just north of the sites that we just showed on that map. And you can see that the majority of the surface of this lot is either paving or just grass. And so going back to some of the concepts in the book, there are lots of opportunities here to think differently about the way that this is planted, about the permeability of the surface, about the diversity of the species that are being planted. And so very quickly, this is a preliminary schematic design showing kind of the vision, but a few of the different pieces that I wanted to pull out here is this primary entry, which is probably going to be phase A for the park, kind of the first thing that you see when you're approaching from the street. So it's really important. We're looking at doing a pollinator garden there, doing native meadow rather than just grasses or native grasses, perhaps there. In the back, there's a bioswale proposed at the base of the basketball court to collect water. Similarly, a rain garden at the base of the really large Beulah Baptist Church parking lot there. So just think those are some of the key opportunities that we've been looking at for the design of this park, which again is very early stages. And I just wanted to bring up a couple of the design dilemmas that we're actually facing when it comes to this park, as we are still continuing to get feedback and to work with partners to figure out how implementing that vision might be possible. one of them is the barrier between the park along the creek and the school just beyond, which you can't see because of the trees. This is pretty much not visible through here. And the trees are very well established, but going back to Natalie's inventory, the majority, probably over 90% of these trees are Norway maples. And so they are not native. They are very large though, they're very tall. They don't hold up well in storms. We've discovered that's why a lot of them fall over into the creek and actually block the flow of the water. They do block visibility, and we've spoken to the school about this many times, and that's actually one of the primary reasons that the school does not want to use the park, is because they can't see through from the school to the park. So if you have kids playing there, visibility is actually really critical for them. So from their perspective, they would prefer fewer trees or no trees. And there's a lot of poison ivy there as well. So it's this question, but then additionally, you know, as we hear from Jen Rubo, who's worked with us on this project, how important shade is to help maintain the biodiversity in the creek and the ecosystem there. So they are already established. So it's that dilemma, right? Should we take trees down? Should we take all of them down? Should we take some of them down and then plant some new? And how do we maintain what they have, their root structure, also preventing against erosion versus, you know, the benefits of not having them there. And then additionally, the walls, which vary in their condition as you go through the creek. In some places, the wall is in great condition. In others, it's crumbling and really needs to be structurally reinforced. And this actually has limited our ability to think about the green right here next to the path that's kind of cracking. We have been told that we cannot plant there because they may have to come in and actually excavate and do something with those walls in the near future. So that's kind of off limits for thinking about plantings or gardens or trees, which is kind of unfortunate. And then also just thinking about tree buffers and other types of bridging between properties. So the church owns the left side of the image, the park owns the right. Right now, it's all bordered by fencing, but and they need that fencing for security reasons. They have, even with the fencing there, they've had people break in, they've had things stolen. They worry about safety at night. They have a lot of youth groups using the church at night. And so they want to have a privacy and security buffer there, but you know, we're also kind of opening up the question, is there another way? Is it possible to do a vegetative buffer instead? And what would the benefits of that be? And then also adding grasses and that rain garden as we had proposed. And then again, just the entryway and the importance of biodiversity and alternative forms of plantings, not only because, well, I mean, they have so many benefits, as you all know, right? But beauty is one of them. And being able to bring amazing insects and butterflies and other wildlife and birds to this park. So I'll leave it there.
Excellent. Oh, all right. So I guess that means it's time for some questions. So who has a question? Can you hear me? Yes. Okay, Eileen, go ahead. Eileen, you'll have to unmute.
This is more or less a comment. I'm wondering, our group may be going on tours. I'm wondering if we might be able to go to the College Hill Park and see their pollinator garden. I've lived here for so long and I've heard about College Hill Park. I've never been there. and I would have no idea how to get in and get up or whatever. So
Great.
I just would like to suggest that maybe our group could meet and go sometime.
Sounds good. I like that.
I will
Thank
say
you.
that the entrance is a little bit hidden to the park, which is something that I think both Mass and the city have been looking at in terms of how to do better signage. So the entrance is on North Clinton. And if you blink, you can almost miss it. There are two very large signs, but for some reason, they just they don't seem to catch people's attention. So just know that the entrance is, if you're coming from Parker Avenue, you'll start to pass the park on your left-hand side, and then the entrance is kind of at the further extent of the park. But that portion close to Parker Avenue is where the new pollinator garden will go. But I think I highly recommend it. I was just up in College Hill Park the other week during the snowstorm, cross-country skiing up there, because there's never anybody up there. And it's such an amazing resource. That used to be a hot spot in Poughkeepsie during the Victorian era. Everybody was going up there. I hear stories about one time there was a ski rope up there that would take people up, and it used to be the hot spot. So it's definitely a beautiful space to go see. It has great views of the city as well. Highest point in the city, actually.
Very good. Thank you. Who's next? Yes, go ahead, David. Got to unmute, sorry.
I could be wrong about this, but I think if you follow the Fallkill Creek north, it comes from Hyde Park, runs along Creek Road. And there's a beautiful section of the creek there that looks like it would be nice for kayaking. And has there been any talk about the fall? It's been such a forgotten resource for so many years. Has there been any talk about restoring it further north beyond the city of Poughkeepsie?
Yeah, not at this time. That's a great point. It goes very far north, actually. Its source is pretty far up there, but we've mostly just been focusing on the part of it that runs through the city of Poughkeepsie. But I absolutely agree, and I think that the upstream a little bit further, there may be more opportunities where it's easier to actually interact with the creek. It's easier to get down to the creek. It isn't as channelized. So there may be some low-hanging fruit along other parts of the route. Yes.
Thank you.
And Evelina, while I have you, Craig asks, is there any chance of actually getting rid of the retaining walls and creating a sloped bank to the Fallkill Creek?
Yes, I love that suggestion. We really want to make that happen. It has been difficult. We've proposed it in a couple of places, one of which is actually the backyard of the Family Partnership Center, where we showed that picture of the giant wall. And, one of the reasons for that is actually because of flooding. You'd think that having a high wall would protect against flooding, but in many cases, it actually further contributes to the water overflowing into the adjacent buildings. And if you had more of a sloped a bank up against the edge of the creek that was actually able to absorb some of that water, it would actually help to prevent against flooding for the adjacent buildings. So that being said, it's been proposed. We've gotten a lot of pushback from civil engineers, from the city, DPW, and it's a matter of cost. It is an infrastructural investment, but is it worth it? I think so. So we'll see if we're able to implement it somewhere.
I'll also just jump in on that. I mean, I think one of the big issues there too is that a lot of this runs through private property. A lot of the Fallkill is the rear backyard of a private property, and whether those walls are sustaining, foundations are, structurally important to these homes that are along there. I think that's a big issue. And I think, there is a lot of discussion about channelization and natural borders of creeks, and what is better for flooding. And I think one of the hardest things about the fall kill is going to be, and I think why there is pushback against it, is the benefits of dechannelizing are better if you dechannelize the whole creek, right? Rather than just portions, which may not have as many of the benefits as you seek from dechannelizing if the rest of the area is still channelized and getting blockages with, we find all kinds of things, mattresses and large tree branches and everything in there. So I think that it's a system-wide thing, which most natural features are, right? And it's really hard to, I mean, in the US, it's hard to get all the property owners along that piece to agree to one thing, but then it's also hard to find the funding to do a system-wide improvement at one time. And then I just want to say to the earlier question, there is a group called the Northside Collaborative that has recently begun to look at the Fall-Kill Creek beyond the border, not necessarily them, but partnering with other organizations to look beyond the Fall-Kill Creek just within the city of Poughkeepsie. A lot of that is revolving around water quality, and obviously to look at water quality or to improve water quality, we have to be looking upstream as well as downstream. We can do a lot downstream, but if you're not improving things upstream, the impacts are going to be smaller. So I know that group, which is a coalition of multiple nonprofit organizations and professors from Marist and whatnot, thinking about that. So that might be a group worth tapping into or following.
Yeah, just to follow up to that real quick is that the group specifically focusing on the water quality has broken off to become the Fall-Kill Watershed Alliance. And they're like an offshoot of the Northside Collaborative, so they would probably be the better ones to get in touch with. But again, Jen Rubo is a connection there. Always a good person to reach out to on these types of things. And then one other follow-up was just to say that Natalie, I completely agree that it would be fantastic if we could look at this holistically and actually dechannelize the entire creek. But it is possible to do it in specific locations. You just have to get a structural engineer in there and make sure that wherever you cut into the wall, it's structurally sound enough that it doesn't degrade the rest of the wall around it.
That's sort of funny. I wouldn't have expected that. You have a question, Jen?
There's another question, I think can you hear me?
No.
Natalie, where does the city buy its plants? No,
Mute.
can't hear me? Whoops, Natalie, you've got to unmute.
Yeah, I can hear. You are cutting out a little bit, but I heard the question. I see it in the chat. The city does have a few local nurseries that I think they have on file, and depending on the purchase, we sometimes have to go to a bid if it's over a certain dollar amount, and whoever comes in at the cheapest price, or usually at the cheapest price is what it is, gets that. I don't know offhand who those nurseries are that they have on that list, though, unfortunately. Sorry.
Okay, all right. I saw that Moira was looking to ask a question. Moira?
Oh, I just wanted to ask what I put in the chat. I know it looks like there's some exciting things happening for the YMCA site. And so I was wondering from, I guess, mostly Natalie, like if there has been any discussion yet of like potential gardening options for that.
Yeah, you're right that there is some movement there. I think at this point it's a little bit early into the stage of that, right? That there was preliminary designs that were at a concept level. I think the idea of ownership and development is still being worked out, but there definitely will be a site plan. And I could imagine definitely in that space that there could be either food gardening or native meadows or plants. But at this point, we don't have an approved site plan for that space yet. But I hope so. I think would be a great addition down there.
Wonderful. Eileen?
I have two questions. One is what percentage of the property along the Fall-Kill is private? And then the other question is, what's the difference between a bioswale and a rain garden?
Yeah, so percentage is going to be difficult. We did do an analysis at one point. I'd say it's probably around 30%. So less than half, don't quote me on this number, but I think less than half, but a considerable amount is privatized. And to the second question, a bioswale tends to be what you would see along roadways. So it's kind of like a ditch that's usually planted with natives that are good at handling a lot of moisture, a lot of runoff from the street. So it's a great street feature to kind of help to collect and mitigate stormwater runoff. A rain garden, on the other hand, tends to be larger. It would be something more like a swamp, if you were to look at it. And it's actually designed to catch and hold large amounts of runoff in more of a basin type fashion, but similarly typically planted with a lot of native grasses and native plants that are water tolerant.
Okay, thank you.
We have a question from Susan. Is there any way that the holistic approach of channeling the creek with natural ways and removal of walls could be integrated into the Poughkeepsie Climate Smart community effort? It seems like the holistic approach would benefit the Climate Smart initiatives.
Yeah, I mean, I would have to look at the specific actions. There is one about kind of preserving natural areas through zoning or regulation. I'd have to, you know, the actions are a little bit specific in terms of what garners you points and ultimately what can get you grant funding for certain things. I don't recall seeing like a restoration, but even if it's not climate smart communities, there's a number of other, the Hudson River Valley Greenway, which is, you know, where we get a lot of grants, or other organizations that I could imagine that potentially being a project through. Although, again, one of the hindrances is if, you know, for the city to apply for grants like that, they usually require some kind of acknowledgement of property ownership of the site that is the subject of a project, right? So that, I think it would just take a large effort on the front end to do communication and outreach to property owners along the Fallkill to even be able to submit for a grant for funding to kind of do that work. And then if the city ever had the money itself one day to do that, I mean, that may be a little bit easier, but right now, a lot of the work that I do in terms of climate smart improvements or conservation or tree inventories is grant funded. So that's kind of where I look to find funding.
Good. Since the old YMCA was brought up, a chat Lori says in the chat, the city of Poughkeepsie is having a meeting about the Y on March 3rd. That's next week at 6 o'clock. Who else has a question? Okay, Abby, no, yeah, it's Abby's equipment.
It's John. It's John, but
okay.
Debbie, are there any dams left on the Fallkill? Are there any obstacles left on the Fallkill?
No, no longer. Only ones that are made naturally through down trees or buildup of trash. And that's actually something that contributed significantly to flooding on the north side during Hurricane Irene in 2011. Was backups that were not designed, not, you know, deliberate, but were just buildups of debris. But it is interesting, now that you mention it, it's always fascinating to go back and look at the history. And if you overlay the location of the historic mill ponds that were dammed with locations, the boundary of the FEMA 100-year floodplain, they overlap quite a bit. So you can see that the areas of the city that are flooding today tend to be the areas that historically held water.
Interesting.
Evelina, there is some culverted sections of Fallkill, right, where they're not daylit. I know of the one right along, is that Verrazano? Off of whether you walked it, so I feel like you know more than I. Are there other culverts besides that, or is that the one kind of hidden space?
Yes, there are culverts. There are, I believe, there are four within the city boundaries that I know of. The Verrazano one, you're right, it's right along the street there, and the creek kind of disappears for a little while and then reappears. Usually the culverts are to go under streetways. So that's the longest one that you mentioned. The other bigger one is right beneath Catherine Street at that large intersection. It goes under the street there and then reappears. So that's an interesting location. We actually have proposed that the city owned, I don't know if I I can say this, you know, it's not happened yet, but the city owned lot that's kind of a triangle lot right next to the arterial there. We had proposed to daylight the creek there, get rid of the parking lot, and so you could actually look down and see the creek.
Cool. Just because this is such a fabulous group of passionate folks, I'm wondering, are there opportunities with the city or Mass Design for volunteers?
Yeah, from the city end, so we actually just did a call, the mayor. So there's a few different commissions and boards around the city of Poughkeepsie. I think most relevant to this group would be the Shade Tree Commission that currently exists, or the Waterfront Advisory Committee that the city has, is very focused on like green infrastructure and reducing pervious pavements around the city. So those are two boards that have members on them appointed by the mayor. The Waterfront Advisory Committee also has members appointed by the Common Council. And so every so often, either the mayor or the Common Council will send out a request for resumes. So I know Mayor Rollison just did that at the end of 2020 and did interviews, but I imagine, you know, we get quite a bit of turnover on that. So I think it's always good to send, if you're interested, to just send a letter of interest and your resume to the city chamberlain. And that usually gets sent to me, and I keep those on file for whenever we have an appointment. I think going forward, something that we're also looking to do is form a climate smart communities task force. It's one of the required actions in order to get our climate smart certification. So that's a task force that the mayor will be looking to form in the coming months as we get going with that certification process. And then, you know, on a larger scale, something that's been discussed in the city is forming a conservation advisory committee. So there is one in the town of Poughkeepsie. They have a conservation advisory committee. I think a lot of the responsibilities of a CAC overlap with the Shade Tree Commission and the Waterfront Advisory Committee. Some things we've seen, like in Newburgh, right? They consolidated their Waterfront Advisory Committee and their Shade Tree Committee into a larger group that focused on conservation projects across the city. So that can look at waterfront projects. Shade Tree could assist with climate smart communities task force initiatives, as well as you know, general kind of even an education campaign like this, right? With private property owners in the city. That's something that a CAC would be ripe to do. I know the city's been thinking about forming one for a while. It would have to be formed by the Common Council. But yeah, those are the groups that exist or that may exist in the future. So the best way, if you go to City of Poughkeepsie website, the city chamberlain is usually kind of the main input for all that information. So just send a letter of interest and a resume.
Okay, Evelina, anything to add?
Yeah, there are a couple things. The first is, I just wanted to mention that for College Hill Park, I know that they're always looking for volunteers to help with the pollinator garden up there. And that would go through Jen Rubo, that's not through Mass, but I just wanted to mention that they always need help. So if you're into gardening, they could use you. And it's also an opportunity to get up to the top of that park and spend some time there. The other thing is you can reach out, I can put my email in the chat, but feel free to reach out to me if you're interested in getting involved. We are in the process of getting funding to work on the beginning of the Malcolm X Park project. The first step, which we envision, will be the entrance. And what's going to go there, at least for the time being, it might change, but the plan is to do a community mosaic wall with seating embedded in it, and then the pollinator garden in front of that. And so it'll be a mix of landscaping and hands-on building, some mosaic design, and we're going to work with some local youth to do that as well, but we can always use a helping hand there. So like I said, that we have not secured funding for that yet, but we're hoping that it'll kick off this summer. And if you're interested in getting involved, feel free to shoot me a message. We're always kind of, new projects just kind of come down the pipeline. And whenever we're doing a community build, we always need as many hands as we can get. And I'll also just mention that we will be moving into 289 Main Street next week, which is really exciting because we will, next week. So we will be using that space to put out more information about what we're up to and when we desire volunteers, and how you can get involved. So if you're around downtown, you can check us out there.
Great. Another question for either of these folks. Eileen?
Has the school that's near the creek been approached regarding possibility of using the creek as a teaching tool at some point?
Yes, yeah, they have, and there was a lot of enthusiasm there. Actually, not just for ecology, science teachers were very excited about using the creek for ecology. And then PE instructors were also very excited about the opportunity of using the park as a recreational outlet for the students. So those were the two. And then art teachers were also interested in doing some art programming over by the creek. You know, it's a great opportunity to paint, to draw, to take photos. We actually did a photography workshop at that creek, or at that part of the creek, with Sean Hemmerly. And so there are lots of opportunities for that creek to become an educational opportunity.
Great.
To that point, there's actually a movement within the city and a collaboration between Dr. Rosser, who's the superintendent of the public school system, and Mayor Rollison, talking about the green schoolyards concept. So I think many of you may be familiar with that, but it really aligns with the message of this book of, you know, looking at the schoolyards that we have that are largely either blacktop in many cases or turf grass, right? And imagining what those spaces could be to get kids more involved with the natural environment and give them new ways to kind of interact. So I know that I recently got pulled into this project, and it's, again, in very early stages. We're looking to kind of get technical assistance to look at the possibility of doing this. I know the Early Learning Center is very interested in it, and then potentially taking it to a system-wide, a school-wide implementation. And I think the importance of that is, and also potentially opening up these spaces to the community, right? So there's a lot of schools and neighborhoods, I think, within the city of Poughkeepsie that aren't necessarily within a 10-minute walk of a park or a natural space, or if they are, they maybe have to cross the arterial or something that maybe might not be very intriguing for them or their parents. So looking at these schoolyards that are dotted around our community as a way to create additional natural green spaces, I think is something that's really interesting to the planning department, and it is obviously a building interest within the school district. So I think that's something exciting to look forward to over the coming year.
Terrific. David, I think you were waving earlier. Do you have a question?
Yeah. The past few years, Mid-Hudson has had increased interest in city of Poughkeepsie, and particularly in the Fallkill Creek. I'm wondering if they're participating in any way with this effort.
Yes, sorry, I totally neglected to mention all of the partners, but Mid-Hudson has been instrumental in in the fall kill effort in general, as well as in Malcolm X Park. And you may know that they also have been working very closely on Pershing Avenue and developing an urban farm on Pershing. And so those, both Malcolm X Park and Pershing Avenue Park, grew also out of the North Side Collaborative. So that's just making you remember that if you would like to become a part of the North Side Collaborative, that's also a great way to just hear about what initiatives are going on, how you can plug in and get involved. But yes, these two sites, Scenic Hudson has been very instrumental in getting feedback and working on the designs and getting momentum going.
Thank you.
Natalie, I recall that a couple of weeks ago when we were discussing the book, a question came up or a suggestion came up that maybe the city could wield some power, some zoning or development restrictions to kind of force developers to plant natives. When there's a new development going in somewhere, is there any way that the city has some clout in saying what gets planted?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely the Shade Tree Commission has a lot of control. They review all site plans that come before the planning board that have any trees or landscaping, and they will review and comment on the species of plants being proposed for a site. So I think that's definitely one way. Also, I think something I neglected to mention about the natural resource inventory is that when that was created by Ambassador Barnes, it was also adopted by the Common Council as a document, which is one step, right? Saying we acknowledge this document, but the Common Council actually went one step further and they adopted a regulation within the code that any project that has to go before the planning board that needs to go through state environmental review also has to reference the natural resource inventory. So there's, every project that's coming before the planning board that has to do environmental review has to go through those 6 maps and show the planning board their site within those 6 maps to see how it relates to those various resources that were inventoried. So I think that's the early stage. I think there's still a lot of work that could be done with the planning board and with the Shade Tree Commission to really focus on natives. I think they definitely use the natural resource inventory and existing resources to say, hey, look, you're right next to this natural resource, this natural site. Can you reduce the amount of land that you turn into pervious surfaces? Can you think about things like bioswales? Can you think about things like managing your stormwater on site, or planting more trees and not cutting down trees? But I think you're right. I think there's definitely like a further leap that we can all go to then start focusing specifically on natives and natural habitats. But the work's begun, I think, but you're absolutely right that that's something that can be taken further.
Well, that's very exciting. Thank you so much for shedding light on that. And for both Evelina and Natalie, we really appreciate you taking the time out. I understand my internet connection is getting unstable, sorry. But I just wanted to review for everyone where we're at in our series, and then we're gonna wrap it up for tonight. We are now in the stage of our series where we're meeting every other week. So we do not have a meeting next week. We have a meeting on March 10. And we have Jen Rubo coming as one of our invited guest experts from the Vassar Environmental Preserve. Also Kathy Lane, a master gardener and Hyde Park's Visual Environmental Committee lead person, and she is a certified pollinator garden host. So those 2 women will be with us in 2 weeks. March 10. We're going to be focusing a little more on our own properties. Not to say that we can't expand into city and College Hill and town and other places, but today was sort of big picture, next to home. What can we as individuals do in our yards, in our properties, on our curbsides, et cetera? And I'm also taking your suggestions for planning some events coming up in April as well. They will be in the next rotunda, the next newsletter that comes out for the springtime, April, May, June timeframe. In April, I'm looking at the climate smart communities, having some input and discussion about what is that, how is it going, who's involved. We're also going to have someone from the Waterman Bird Club with us and talking about birds and birding and bird counts and bird populations. We'll be looking at the International 30 by 30 initiative, as well as native nurseries and garden consultations. So, and then in June, I'm thinking is when we're going to do our garden visits. So that's what I've got planned so far. I'm always looking for input. You guys are so smart and involved in all kinds of great garden and ecosystem stuff. So I always look forward to your emails and your input. I think that is it for tonight. Again, I do want to remind anyone who's not had a chance to read the book, Nature's Best Hope. Pick it up at a copy. I've got mine all scribbled up, so it's better if I own my own copy. But thank you again to Natalie and to Evelina. Thank you all for coming tonight and participating in this event. Good night to all of you. Thank you.